to go. Order, order. I call Jess Brown-Fuller to move the motion.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. I beg to move that this House has considered maternity services. Thank you. It is an honour to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Christopher. And I would also like to thank all the members in attendance for their interest in this important topic, and the Backbench Business Committee for allocating time to debate maternity services in England. On average, a baby is born in England every 56 seconds. Over 1,500 babies each day, most of them delivered in an NHS setting with the help and support of a maternity department or at home with an NHS community midwife by their side. It's over 500,000 babies every year. I contributed to that statistic in 2014 and 2019 when I gave birth to my children at St Richard's Hospital in Chichester. Two very different births that I will not spend my valuable time in this debate reflecting on, Chair, because there are far more important voices that need to be heard and considered. A person is at their most vulnerable moment when they or their partner go into labour. You put your health, your safety, the safety of your unborn child into the hands of professionals that work in that setting. The midwives, the obstetricians, the anaesthetists, the neonatologists, to support you in the safe delivery of your child and get you all home safe. And in the majority of births, that is the case. However, several investigations have revealed fundamental flaws in how maternity care is delivered across England. A Care Quality Commission inspection of 131 maternity units found that 65% were not safe for women to give birth in, with studies showing that 1/5 of all causes of stillbirth are potentially preventable. The Ockenden report, led by Donna Ockenden, investigated the maternity services at the Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital NHS Trust, but it highlighted the flaws in maternity care across England. The report laid out immediate and essential actions which are key to reforming maternity services and ensuring that every mother and baby receives the care they deserve and should expect. Donna reflected in her report that sometimes that spotlight can feel harsh to staff on the front line, doing their very best in what are often extremely challenging circumstances. In conversation with midwives and others working in the maternity care sector, I recognised that each one I spoke to entered the profession as a calling or a vocation or a passion for supporting mothers to bring their babies into the world. They are frontline NHS staff who often go above and beyond the call of duty to support and care for their patients in those extraordinary hours and days. Midwives in particular spend significant time with expectant mothers, supporting them through all stages of pregnancy and birth. They see women at their most vulnerable. They act as therapists, teachers, friends and maternal figures, yet across the country, staffing levels are inadequate. In 2023, midwives and support workers worked over 100,000 hours of unpaid overtime every week. The pressure and stress on them is immense, and this leads to burnout, absenteeism, high staff turnover, and the loss of experienced professionals from the field. And this ultimately puts patient safety at risk.
On that note, the Honourable Lady.
Happily give way.
Thank you, and I want to congratulate the Honourable Lady on bringing forward this debate and the excellent and persuasive way that she's making her case. On that issue of burnout, does she agree that one of the biggest issues is that when a tragedy happens, often midwives and obstetricians feel that if they speak out, there's a risk that they or their institution will get sued or they could get fired from their jobs? And litigation reform to try and change the rules of the game so that people are able to be open when they think they've made a mistake and learn from those mistakes is one of the most important ways that we could improve the record on patient safety that is of concern to her as it is to me.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and I agree wholeheartedly that we need to change the way that we do litigation, because NHS trusts often argue that they want to learn and they want to grow from experiences that are poor, and yet the litigation system that we're working in means that they rarely have the opportunity to do so because everybody is so afraid to speak out. So we need to change that culture within maternity services and the NHS as a whole. As a country, we are training more midwives than ever before. Yet retention remains a problem, and the pandemic exacerbated an already difficult situation with highly trained midwives with families or caring responsibilities leaving the profession too soon.
On that point, would my honourable friend give way?
Happily give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and I congratulate you on bringing this debate to this chamber today. Frimley Park Hospital in my constituency in 2023 received an outstanding report from the Care Quality Commission, but it nonetheless identified inadequate staffing remains one of the highest risks on the maternity register, and that has daily implications. Many midwives reported, for example, that daily checks were often incomplete, handovers were interrupted and not standardised, and mandatory training was often not completed. Does my honourable friend agree with me that to ensure high-quality maternity care from the point of entry and admission to discharge requires not only stringent oversight by trust boards, but also far greater care for staff in the setting of the hospital itself, providing safe spaces where conversations can be had, where handovers can take place, where nurses can rest. And in that way, we'll both retain and also hopefully recruit more of our vital nursing staff.
Brown Fuller.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and he's absolutely right. The key to providing strong maternity services that benefit both the staff and the patients is making sure that you have a full workforce so that they can do not just the need-to-haves, but the nice-to-haves in a maternity department as well, that can make such a difference to patient experience when they're going through that service. And this retention issue that we have directly impacts training, because newly qualified and inexperienced midwives need experienced mentors. But if seasoned professionals leave, the next generation lacks the support necessary to transition into leadership roles. Midwives and other maternity staff must train together at every level to be fully equipped for every situation and ensure that concerns can be escalated effectively. And that is why the Ockenden Report and the Royal College of Midwives seek a commitment to including midwives in the long-term workforce plan. In 2017, bursaries for student nurses and midwives were ended, with the Royal College of Midwives warning that this decision threatened the future of our maternity services in England. Now, this has led to a third of midwifery students having debts exceeding £40,000, with 80% of midwifery students knowing someone who has dropped out of their course due to financial hardship. Many also take on additional jobs to avoid their studies, which then detracts from their vital training. To mitigate these pressures on trainee midwives, I encourage the government to explore alternative routes to support midwifery and nursing students, which has been laid out by the Royal College of Midwives through new funding options, or a scheme where student debt is forgiven after a defined period of service in the NHS. A similar funding issue affects apprenticeship schemes in midwifery. Despite receiving overwhelmingly positive feedback from trusts across the country with regards to the apprenticeship route, many trusts cannot afford to offer these positions due to a lack of backfill funds. So trusts are often handing back their apprenticeship levy as the scheme is undeliverable. So I hope the Minister will work with her colleagues in the Department of Education to address this fundamental flaw in the delivery of Level 6 and Level 7 apprenticeships that have proven to deliver the midwives of the future. So, Christopher, in preparing for today's debate, I was invited to my local maternity unit at St Richard's Hospital in Chichester, where I mentioned I had both of my children. University Hospital Sussex had its maternity services inspected by the CQC in September 2021, which found all hospitals across the trust to be inadequate or requiring improvement. Although there hasn't been a formal inspection since, the Trust assures me that all actions from the CQC have been completed, with the majority of the Ockenden IEAs implemented. But to fully implement all of the IEAs will require funding, which currently the Trust doesn't have. St Richard's Hospital confidently tells me it's now fully staffed for the first time in a long time, and the Director of Maternity Services is keen to look at how she can further improve patient experience and communication. I know colleagues across the House are keen to work with their NHS trusts constructively to ensure the best outcomes possible for their constituents. And I was reassured by the senior leadership team, those working in the department and the new parents on the ward that I had the pleasure of congratulating. Probably the best moment of recess is introducing tiny babies to the world. And very bizarre for those parents as well when the MP walks in and says, "Oh, can I say hello?" And I'm pleased that the Trust is taking its responsibility to provide a much improved service seriously. So, Christopher, it would be a missed opportunity if I, as the chair of the APPG for infant feeding, did not mention how much more we can be doing as a society to support mothers to breastfeed if they choose to. But the UK's breastfeeding rates are among the lowest in the world. Only 1% of mothers exclusively breastfeed at 6 months, despite the World Health Organization recommendations for exclusive breastfeeding for this period and continuation alongside nutritious foods for up to 2 years. 44% of surveyed mothers wish that they'd breastfed for longer and would have done if they'd had better and more tailored support. New mothers need time, expertise and evidence-based information to make informed decisions on their feeding choices, and maternity services play a key role in establishing a feeding plan that works for mother and baby before they go home. But community midwifery and health visiting services have been vaporised across the country, and so support is patchy, often delivered by volunteers or midwives in their spare time. I hope that the government will support improved community services such as milk support groups to give all women, regardless of their feeding choices, somewhere to turn to when they need support. Now, I'm going to take the opportunity, perhaps selfishly, to get the name of one of the coolest kids I ever met on the record. Benedict Henry Goodfellow was an absolute dude, and I'm not going to cry. I'm proud to call his mum, Steph, one of my close friends and the strongest woman that I know. And this is why this debate is so important to me, because Bendy needed 24-hour care since birth after a case of extreme birth trauma left him with devastating neurological damage. Bendy was loved by everyone that came into contact with him until he died, aged 10. The experience left Steph traumatised and profoundly changed. Bendy was born nearly 30 years ago, and yet Steph and Ben's story is still just as relevant today, and it shouldn't be. I'm immensely grateful to Donna Ockenden for putting me in touch with families from across the country ahead of this debate, including Leeds, Nottingham, Shrewsbury and Sussex, to hear their personal experiences of failures in maternity care. Happily give way.
Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing that. On the point of Leeds, as a member for Leeds North West, you may have spoken to some of my constituents who tragically, Dan and Fiona lost their baby Aliona after only 27 minutes. And despite the fact that the inquest found a number of gross failings, the figures out only last night at Leeds are pretty horrifying to see. Does my honourable member agree with me there are grounds for an independent review about the maternity services at Leeds?
I thank the honourable member for her intervention, and she's absolutely right to raise the case of Dan and Fiona, and I was lucky enough to have them give up their time to share their story with me, which was heartbreaking. And they are at the forefront of this fight to have an independent inquiry at Leeds, and I know that the Secretary of State for Health did say that he would go away and investigate whether there was cause for an investigation, but those families are still waiting to find out if that will go ahead. And the reason I wanted to meet with families like Dan and Fiona is to ensure that the questions I am asking the Minister today are the questions that those families would be asking if they had the opportunity to be standing here. Because I cannot begin to imagine how exhausting it is reliving the moments that their lives changed forever, over and over again, in the pursuit of better outcomes for the next family. So I will include a number of their questions to the Minister in my closing remarks, but I would just like to reflect that the families who were able to share their experiences with me were overwhelmingly white, middle class, often highly educated, and many with medical backgrounds or academic careers before going through this trauma. The Lord Darcy report found that black women are almost 3 times as likely as white women to die in childbirth, and neonatal mortality in the most deprived areas is more than double that in the least deprived. Who is speaking up for those families? Who is ensuring that transparency and accountability is there for those who have a fundamental distrust of the medical profession, or have learning disabilities, or who have English as their second language, and they are not supported in navigating the complex systems that are in place? Negligence claims in obstetrics account for just 13% of the volume of litigation received by NHS resolution in 23-24, but nearly 60% of the total cost of clinical negligence claims, totalling over £1 billion every year. Beyond financial costs, These failures carry a devastating human toll. If we truly invest in our maternity services, in both the professionals and the facilities, more than money is saved, lives are saved. So in conclusion, Sir Christopher, I would like to ask the following questions of the Minister. Firstly, the previous government was supportive of the Ockenden review, and previous health ministers had made assurances that maternity services were going to get the support they so desperately needed. I know the Secretary of State for Health is supportive of the Ockenden review and has met with many of the bereaved parents since the general election. In that meeting, the Secretary of State assured those parents that fixing maternity is a priority for this government and that actions would be outlined publicly before Christmas 2024. He then came back shortly after Christmas saying they needed more time. So this is now 2 months overdue. So can the Minister assure me that those families will hear an update in the near future? Does the government support all of the Ockenden report immediate and essential actions arising from the review into the Shrewsbury and Telford Trust? And how will the government ensure all ICBs and trusts across the UK implement all of the actions? And what support will be provided to the trusts to achieve this and to prevent a postcode lottery of maternity care? If these IEAs are implemented, what will the government's measure of success be? As we currently have no national data regarding preventable deaths, it's the charitable sector that have determined over 800 baby deaths a year could have been prevented. One of the IEAs is a long-term plan to secure a safe maternity workforce and improve training. So can we expect to see maternity care professionals, including neonatologists, obstetricians and anaesthetists, alongside midwifery colleagues, included in the refresh of the 10-year workforce plan for the NHS? An overriding theme in my conversations with bereaved parents was a hesitancy to prosecute from the CQC. Cases were often supported in the first instance, with the families then informed just days before the 3-year statute of limitations expires that they will no longer be seeking a prosecution, and those families having no time to appeal that decision. So does the Minister believe that a 3-year statute of limitation is appropriate when often families dealing with bereavement are not even considering a case in the first 12 months? And does the Minister have any concerns with the abilities of CQC as a regulator? Or does she agree with the parents that there is a reluctance to prosecute with the leadership of CQC when there have been failures in patient care? Does the Minister support the calls from both SANS and Tommy's charities for all triage phone lines to be recorded, as currently they are not? And finally, parents repeatedly reported to me that the bereavement care they received felt like a tick box exercise, with a lot of the focus on the mother and a lack of communication and support for the father when both have suffered that bereavement. So does the Minister agree that communication could be vastly improved across maternity services in all cases so both parents have the opportunity to understand what happened in those most vulnerable hours? I'd like to finish by thanking every member who's come to the Chamber today to talk about this important issue, to thank Donna Ockenden and all that contributed to the creation of the review. But my greatest thanks goes to all the families who gave up their time to share their stories with me and remind me that those babies were people, not statistics. They are loved, they are missed, and they deserved better. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered maternity services. Dr. Becky Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the Honourable Member for Chichester for calling this debate. As my neighbouring parliamentarian on the South Coast, I know that we are both passionate champions of the health of our coastal residents and want the best healthcare provision for all, including maternity services. Unfortunately, despite numerous reviews, plans and strategies, too many maternity services, as my honourable member has pointed out, remain shockingly, stubbornly poor. Successive investigations into high-profile failures have described patterns of dysfunctional and even dangerous cultures, failures in listening to families and missed opportunities to address known issues. As a result, too many mothers and babies have experienced substandard care and unacceptably poor outcomes. In the last year, the number of maternity services in England awarded inadequate or requires improvement ratings by the CQC increased from 54% to 67%. Of the 131 maternity services inspected from August 2022 to December 2023, only 4% were rated outstanding, and not one was rated outstanding for safety. In this context, we see stagnating progress to improve rates of stillbirth and maternal mortality rates not seen in the UK for over 20 years. As we have already heard, black women are almost 3 times more likely and Asian women almost twice as likely than white women to die during birth or postnatally. Maternal mortality rates for women from the most socioeconomically deprived areas are also twice those for women from the least deprived areas. Closing the black and Asian maternal mortality gap and tackling profound health inequalities such as these is rightly a priority for this Labour government, and it is the reason I went into politics. Poor outcomes exist too for the most vulnerable and marginalised women, such as refugees, LGBTQ+ women, prisoners, those who have been through the care system or experienced domestic violence or sexual abuse, all of whom are more likely to experience poorer maternity care and resultant trauma. Poor standards in maternity services are part of a wider picture of a healthcare system that has not prioritised women's reproductive health. The Women and Equalities Committee highlights that gynaecological care waiting lists have grown faster than any other speciality in recent years. As a public health professional, it saddens me to say, but the NHS Confederation reports that the UK stands out as the country with the largest female health gap in the G20 and the 12th largest globally, with women spending 3 more years in ill health and disability when compared to men. Now, these are systemic failings that underpin the poor outcomes and health inequalities that we see in maternity care. As a public health doctor, I have worked in and led health teams, and as the proud MP for Worthing West, I have heard from dedicated staff across our local services. So I understand that systemic issues fail staff as well as patients. In our own hospital in Worthing, the maternity services are staffed by hard-working, capable healthcare professionals who want to be able to get on with the job that they have trained for. They are as frustrated and saddened as the rest of us when processes, equipment, staffing levels and governance is simply inadequate for the provision of excellent healthcare. Our government has pledged to recruit and train thousands more midwives, which is to be warmly welcomed. And the forthcoming 10-year plan for the NHS is an opportunity to address the underlying problems of a de-skilled and demoralised workforce that impact maternity services. We must take action to improve midwife training and retention, address the numbers of qualified medical staff on maternity wards, improve patient voice, and bring a relentless focus on safety and compassion. There is an urgent need to transform the health and social care system, and in doing so, we have a superb opportunity to be looking at innovative models of integrated and accessible neighbourhood health maternity services delivered alongside hospital care. Finally, I welcome the recommendations of the Birth Trauma APPG for a national maternity improvement strategy and a maternity commissioner to drive improved outcomes and rebuild our services. Thank you.
First of all, can I commend the Honourable Lady for Chichester for setting the scene so very well, and thank her for her personal stories that she tells. Nothing tells a story better than a personal one, and I thank her for that, for sharing that. I'm the party's health spokesperson, so it's always good to give a local perspective, Sir Christopher, on this due to health being involved. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I look forward very much to the Minister's response and to the Shadow Minister. I think there's a trio here who seem to be in all the debates that we have, and we thank them for their contribution. Our maternity services in Northern Ireland are crucial and arguably one of the most consistent services offered by the NHS. Whilst all of our services are important, everyone must be born, everyone must be given the best start in life, and it is through our wonderful NHS maternity services we are able to succeed. My constituency resides within the South Eastern Health Care Trust, which offers both midwifery led and consultant-led care with a fantastic focus on focal and personalised support for mothers through their pregnancy and after labour. The Trust also provides antenatal clinics, home visits and care options for expecting mothers. Back home in Northern Ireland in October 2024, an independent review concluded that a coordinated system-wide change is needed to radically improve maternity care in Northern Ireland. So there are problems with maternity care, and not just here in the mainland, but obviously with us back home. And the Minister has no responsibility for that, but the Minister has an interest in all things that are pertinent to Northern Ireland, and whenever the subject matter, she always responds to that. So whenever I ask the Honourable Lady, as I always do, for help, she always responds in a very positive fashion, and I appreciate that. There are clear inequalities in services across Northern Ireland. There is no secret that the health service has witnessed extreme difficulties over the last couple of decades. More must be done to support staff and ensure safe and quality care so that women and families feel supported through their journey with pregnancy and indeed with labour. So, Christopher, one of my constituents gave birth to her first baby just last week, and I want to just record what she said because I think it's important for the record. Her experience was made by the incredible student midwife she referred to, who supported her and held her hand the entire way. I remember when my 3 boys were born, that wasn't yesterday, so Christopher, I was there with my wife and she held my hand, and I remember that the blood circulation in my hand was getting less and less as the pain increased in my dear loving wife. But I do say that because when we think of the student midwives who are there and what they've done, I think we have to give them some credit as well. The Department of Health has increased the number of commissioned pre-registration nursing and midwifery university places from 680 in 2013 to 1,335 in 2023. Good figures, but unfortunately, due to budgetary constraints, the number of places returned to the baseline of 1,025, 23, 24. So there has been an increase some time back, and then it just has equalled out and levelled out again. There are thousands of people across Northern Ireland, Sir Christopher, who apply to study nursing and midwifery each year. The number of midwifery training places in Northern Ireland is extremely limited and often exceeds the available spots. The Royal College of Midwives has noticed a downward trend in midwifery applicants and has stated this is a concern for them, and has expressed apprehension about the significant drop in the number of applicants to study midwifery. Again, I'd asked the Minister, has she had an opportunity to, I know the Minister probably has, but for the record, has she had a chance to speak to the Royal College of Midwives to get their opinion on where we are and how we could help better? We must look at this, why this is. It could be said for so many that because it is a challenging field to get into, many don't see the point in applying directly for midwifery. Again, I'd ask the Minister what our thoughts would be in relation to how do we improve that. And in addition to this, some state that it is in fact easier to progress in a career by going in at entry level as opposed to starting university after school and trying to get a job after. There must be ambitious reform of these services to ensure that we can support expectant mothers and give them experiences which are memorable and positive. We often hear of some horror stories, but we must allow for the best start in life for babies and families. To conclude, Sir Christopher, we have some of the best staff in our maternity wards, and their work and dedication must be highly recognised. They are hammered day and daily in their jobs due to budgetary constraints and their inability to get the support they need. So I look to the Minister, I look to Government for commitment to our NHS, and more importantly, a commitment to those that work within it, that more will be done to properly fund our wonderful maternity services across this whole of this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and provide families and parents with the best possible start to their little lives. And I very, very much would request that the Minister perhaps could have discussions with the relevant Minister, which is Mike Nesbitt, in relation to what we're doing back home, so we can work better together. So, Christopher, thank you so much.
Thank you, Christopher. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I thank the member for Chichester for securing this important debate. I should note at the start here my officership in the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Infant Feeding and the APPG for single-parent families. Women's health in this country is already an often under-prioritised area of our health system, with the UK found to have the largest female health gap in the G20, as my friend from Worthing West noted earlier. Women are falling through the gaps that have been made worse by the past 14 years of austerity and reorganisations of the health system. The situation facing midwifery and maternity services is even more dire. As a member of the Health and Social Care Select Committee, I've met with the Royal College of Midwives, who made clear that their own worries and concerns about the need for better investment in midwifery and maternity services, and further concerns about safe staffing levels in the workforce facing crisis. The real concerns are borne out by the National Review of Maternity Services that found 47% of maternity services were rated as requiring improvement on safety grounds. That's not to say that there aren't bright spots of positivity. I've got nothing but praise for the work of Calderdale's maternity services, who were fantastic and supportive at the birth of both of my children. But across the country, the national picture is one of services stretched and midwives working extra hours to plug the gaps. At the end of last year, we saw figures showing that more midwives have left the profession after 5 years or less than before. And the story across the health service is sadly consistent. It's a result of pressure in an NHS that Lord Darcy warned was on life support. This is why the NHS 10-year plan is even more vital and timely. because it not only gives us a real opportunity to begin undoing 14 years of damage to our health service, but also the chance to rebalance our health system and focus on different priorities that have been long neglected, be that maternity services or mental health. Women accessing maternity services do so at a time when they often feel the most vulnerable. It is important that those services are there to protect them in that time.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chair, Sir Christopher. I congratulate my honourable member for Chichester on securing this hugely important debate. So today I wish to highlight both the excellence and the challenges of maternity services in my constituency of Epsom and Ewell. Last year, the dedicated staff at Epsom and St Helier universities delivered over 3,400 babies, and their commitment to patient care is outstanding, with care being ranked #1 in London for patient experience. Both units have also achieved UNICEF UK Baby Friendly Initiative Gold accreditation, reflecting their exceptional support for new mothers in their feeding choices. These outcomes are a testament to the experience, compassion and hard work of the staff, despite the conditions they work under. Our maternity services are simply held back by infrastructure that is simply not fit for purpose. Some of the hospital buildings in Epsom and St Helier are older than the NHS itself. These conditions make it harder to provide the high standards of care that mothers and babies deserve. At St Helier Hospital, the maternity unit's lift breaks down regularly, making it increasingly difficult to safely transfer maternity patients to intensive care or their main theatres. Both Epsom and St Helier hospitals lack waiting areas and suitable space to maintain privacy, making it harder to implement a nationally maintained triage system and making it difficult to have private spaces, which is absolutely vital for bereaved families. Every year, the Trust spends millions just to patch up these crumbling facilities, but this is not sustainable. The cost of maintaining outdated buildings and equipment diverts critical resources away from the front line. Further, staff are stretched thin, running duplicate services across 2 sites, which impacts patient outcomes. The promised new hospital in Sutton was meant to solve these problems, bringing together emergency care, maternity services and inpatient paediatrics in a modern specialist facility. Yet now the government has pushed construction back to at least 2032, leaving our community in limbo. Meanwhile, Epsom General Hospital alone needs repairs worth 44 million. 46% of those are classed at high risk, meaning failure to address these could lead to serious injury or major service disruption. If the UK is to be the safest place in the world to have a baby, we must do better. Beyond the building, staffing remains a critical issue. A local midwife recently shared with me the reality of working in our maternity services. She described how the staffing problems in maternity continue to be dire. There simply aren't enough midwives rostered each day to cover the work, which makes it unsafe for women and their babies and creates an unsustainable working environment for those left behind. Midwives are working long hours, starting early or leaving late, taking on more than they should just to ensure women are seen. This leads to burnout, and many midwives ultimately leave the profession as they feel the stress and huge responsibilities are not matched by adequate support or fair pay. As a woman, she told me how deeply saddened she is that this is the service being offered to women in this country. The care a woman receives during childbirth has lifelong implications, not just for her, but for her children and for society as a whole. She worries that women's choices, particularly around home births, are becoming increasingly sidelined. Women's autonomy over their own bodies is becoming less relevant, and she fears what this means for the future of maternity care for our daughters and granddaughters. And her worries reflect those of so many across the country. Now, I have 3 children, all that were born successfully in London, and I wanted a home birth for all of them. Sadly, we're only successful in having 1 home birth due to complications, but I had the choice, and I'm grateful that I had the choice, and I thank Brierley midwives for that, but not every woman today has that choice. The people of Epsom and Ewell, Leatherhead and Ashstead and around the UK deserve an outstanding maternity care. This should not be hampered by crumbling infrastructure, chronic understaffing and a lack of investment. As a first step, I urge the government to release the full impact assessment of the delays to the new hospital programme and reconsider this decision. We cannot afford to let the maternity services deteriorate any further. The safety of women, babies and midwives depends on it.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. Thank you, Sir Christopher. It's not working. I'm just going to shout. There we go. We're back on. Can I say how much of a pleasure it is to take part in the debate with you in the chair? Before I begin my remarks, can I thank the Honourable Member for Chichester for bringing this debate forwards? Because This debate fundamentally is about giving kids the best start in life and giving mums the best care that they need. And I think there can be few subjects which should be of more importance to us right across the House. Within that, though, the evidence is clear that midwife-led maternity units are great for babies and for mums. They are every single bit as safe as those big hospitals that we've heard many members talking about today. But one of the real benefits that they offer is the option of a more natural birth with less intervention from health professionals unless it is necessary. If a mum delivers at a midwife-led unit, they are less likely to need a caesarean or help from forceps or a vacuum. And while those procedures can be life-saving, and we should thank the people who are using them every single day for supporting those babies and coming into the world, those types of procedures do come with downsides. Caesareans increase the risk for mums, including hemorrhage, blood clots, infections in the womb, and they take much longer to recover from. The potential side effects of having to use forceps and vacuums are less severe, but are nonetheless very real and very present and very there. And as the previous member said, choice for mums is really important, and making sure that people, when they're coming to the end of their pregnancy, they have a choice of where they want to go to be able to deliver, be that at home, be that in a more clinical setting if there's additional risks, or be that in a midwife-led unit, is something that we should all support so that people have the option to have the birth that they want. In Lichfield, we were lucky enough to have a fantastic midwife-led maternity unit at Samuel Johnson Community Hospital. This was closed down during the pandemic for reasons that I think we would all understand given the national crisis that we were going through, but it has never reopened. The closest maternity unit is at Queen's Hospital in Burton, which is 11 miles up the A38, which, when HS2 isn't destroying the transport infrastructure in my constituency, isn't necessarily a significant trip in an ambulance or something along those lines. It does present barriers to people who maybe don't have access to their own transport. But as we currently now stand, that will be the only option available to people in Lichfield. Mums in Lichfield will very soon not have the opportunity to choose that midwife-led unit because it is on the chopping block. That would be a huge loss. This service gave women in Lichfield, Burntwood and the surrounding villages somewhere closer to home to deliver in a calmer, quieter setting than in that big hospital. Where that was appropriate, that's something that I think everybody in this room, and I would assume many people much more widely, would want to support. Shutting that would mean less choice for mums and potentially worse outcomes for mums and for babies. And I've met so many people whose children were born at that unit who are so very happy to have had that option. One of my staff, when I mentioned that I was taking part in this debate, without prompting, just jumped straight in. She said she'd had 4 kids, 2 in a very big hospital in that kind of clinical setting and 2 at the Samuel Johnson. And she was so much happier with the experience that she had in the midwife-led unit. That's not in any way, she wasn't talking down what happened in the other hospital at all, but that more natural, quieter, more relaxed environment was so much of a benefit to her as she was going through childbirth. And I did want to put on record my thanks to everybody who works in the maternity services, but also particularly to those people who want to champion midwife-led units. Thanks.
Liz Jarvis.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Chichester, for securing this important debate. It is particularly important to my constituents Charlotte and James. In April 2019, Charlotte gave birth to a daughter, Nora. Nora was given the all-clear by a doctor, but quickly became poorly. Despite concerning oxygen sats results, Nora was not rushed to the NICU. She died very suddenly that same night. Charlotte and James are still fighting for the truth about why their daughter died. The UK should be the safest place in the world to have a baby. Yet, according to the most recent Care Quality Commission figures, nearly 2/3 of England's maternity services are not safe enough. We must see an end to understaffed maternity units, and I'm sure the Minister will agree that addressing disparities in obstetric care is essential for a fair society. Women and their babies deserve better. All pregnant women in my constituency of Eastleigh and across the UK should have access to safe and fully resourced maternity care. Yet, according to NHS data and the Royal College of Midwives, the number of people in the maternity workforce is shrinking. Midwives and maternity support workers are working in excess of 100,000 hours per week in unpaid overtime. The result is many staff experiencing stress and burnout, with some midwives saying they feel uncared for at work, unable to take breaks, to get a drink of water or use the loo, or with the best will in the world to deliver the kind of maternity care that women expect and deserve. How can the NHS be expected to deliver a higher quality of care with fewer, already very overworked staff? Health outcomes for mothers and babies will only decline if commitments in the workforce plan are not ambitious and funded. I would also like to highlight the often overlooked factor of mental health and maternity care. According to the Maternal Mental Health Care Alliance, 1 in 5 women experience a perinatal mental health problem, and 70% will conceal or underplay maternal mental health difficulties. Tragically, suicide is the leading cause of maternal death in the first year after birth. As you have heard, on average, a baby is born in England every 56 seconds, and the Royal College of Midwives state there is no other NHS service that has as much contact over a prolonged period with so many normally healthy individuals. Through a properly staffed and resourced maternity service, there is great potential to use this period to ensure that after leaving hospital, mothers are in the best possible position mentally to care for their newborns. I fully support the Liberal Democrat manifesto commitment to transforming perinatal mental health and more support for those who are pregnant, new mothers, and those who have sadly experienced miscarriage or stillbirth. In conclusion, while it is welcome that maternity services are important to the government, I share the view of the Royal College of Midwives that we must see that priority reflected in how maternity services feature in the 10-year health plan, with a decade of ambition, focus and a commitment to proper funding. Thank you.
Tom Rutland.
Privileged to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Christopher, and may I start by thanking the Honourable Member for Chichester for securing this important debate. Maternity services are a vital part of our National Health Service. They're unique in that not only are they entrusted with the care of newborns at their most vulnerable and mothers at their time of most need, but they are also there to ensure the wondrous process of bringing a new life into this world is a safe one. For many families, this is the case, and I thank those in our NHS who work tirelessly to deliver the best care that they can, especially against the backdrop of 14 years of chronic underfunding of services and conditions that are not acceptable for a modern healthcare system. But for too many families in East Worthing and Shoreham, and others served by hospitals within the University Hospitals Sussex Trust, despite the hard work of many staff, maternity services are not performing how they should. All 4 maternity units in the Trust have been determined by the CQC to be inadequate or requiring improvement, which shows just how urgently that change is needed. But behind each rating and category are the devastating experiences of real people. I've met with families in my constituency who have had to endure the most tragic and unimaginable suffering as a result of having received inadequate care from the maternity services in the University Hospitals Sussex Trust. Families who are living through the devastation of stillbirth. A baby with no underlying conditions and who, in the eyes of all involved, was completely healthy, tragically died. There were numerous issues that should have triggered additional monitoring and alternative care pathways, but were never acted upon. And while in this case the Trust has admitted failure in care to the parents, I'm aware that the failures were not limited to this case. Another family, again due to welcome into the world a healthy baby with no underlying health conditions, suffered horrendously due to misdiagnosis, delayed treatment and a missed opportunity for a caesarean. These errors were compounded by poor communication and note-keeping, which resulted in clinical staff charged with their care not being aware of earlier events, and yet another unimaginable tragedy taking place. Sadly, these families are not alone, with a group of bereaved families in Sussex who no doubt wish they had no reason to know each other, having to come together to call for action and ensure that no expectant parents have to endure what they went through. I'm glad that our Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for Health have rightly prioritised maternity services improvements as part of their plan to change our NHS, because they too feel the urgency for change that many of my constituents feel. I'm grateful to the families in my constituency who have channelled their grief into the courage to share their harrowing stories with me, and I'm grateful to the Health Secretary for meeting with families previously in the care of University Hospitals Sussex Trust to hear their experiences and their calls for action. Because action is what is needed. With a new baby born every minute, we cannot delay or defer making our maternity services safe for all, including tackling racial inequalities in care. The need is now, and the urgency is clear.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I would like to congratulate my honourable friend and the member for Chichester for bringing this important debate. We're here today because maternity services aren't at the level they need to be at. There are many, many amazing examples across the country of fantastic services. However, we are here to highlight the areas that need urgent improvement to improve the outcomes for all mothers, not just some. The excellent report produced last year by the All-Party Parliamentary Group on birth trauma is to be commended for the way it is helping to highlight the fact for a minority of women, the experience of childbirth is traumatic with long-lasting consequences. The section in the report about stillbirth and neonatal death includes the submission from one mother who reported the following about her experiences, and I quote, "The scenes in the theatre can only be described as chaotic, and these, along with subsequent events, have left me traumatised and suffering with PTSD. In my constituency of Dewsbury and Batley, I would like to pay tribute to the Bronte Birthing Unit, which is a midwife-led birthing centre in the Dewsbury District Hospital. This only recently reopened in April after being closed for 2 years due to staff shortages. It is a place where 2 of my children were born over 20 years ago, so it will always have a special place in my heart. And I would not want my comments to be misconstrued as criticism of services they provide. And we've heard about the differences between midwife-led and consultant-led services, and we've had very positive examples of where midwife-led services are more appropriate and can deliver a better level of care. So I'm not making a point about the merits of midwife versus consultant-led care. The APPG report also cites horror stories from women in childbirth where consultants are present. Rather, the point I want to raise is that in reviewing maternity provision and seeking to minimise the risk to women during childbirth, should we not also be looking at this issue of the seamlessness of obstetrician provision for midwife-led care if required? The mothers giving birth in the Bronte Birthing Centre, God forbid, if they encounter complications that require more in-depth medical care, they would need to be moved from Dewsbury to Wakefield, which is over a half-an-hour journey, and this increases the risks to the mother and the unborn child. So this is an area that I would like the government to help address. The reality is, for many emergency situations, the image painted earlier of sheer terror and panic will be all too real. Considering the likely failure of maternity services to meet the aim of the National Maternity Safety Ambition to halve the 2010 rates of stillbirths by 2025. Indeed, recent figures suggest decline in stillbirth deaths by 20% achieved between 2010 and 2020 is in reverse. It seems imperative we explore every aspect of existing maternity provision to ensure it is as safe as it can be. As has been said, while almost 61% of maternity services are rated good, only 1% are rated as outstanding, and just under 38% are still rated as requiring improvement for safety. Improving maternity services in the NHS is a critical priority, and several key recommendations have been made to enhance care, quality and safety in the many reports since 2010. I would like the Minister to share what steps the government is taking or will take to address workforce gaps where the need to recruit and retain more midwives and maternity staffs is essential to provide adequate support for mothers and babies, to reduce health inequalities, to tackle disparities in maternal health outcomes, particularly for black and ethnic minority women and those in deprived areas, ensuring that adequate funding, including reinstating the bursaries for midwives and nurses, is available and allocated to deliver the best quality maternity services, and enhancing mental health support for women with long-term mental health conditions is crucial. Finally, listening to women's experience is also extremely key, and the continuous gathering and acting on feedback is essential to improve care. And what the government is doing to implement anti-racism strategies so trust can set clear standards of behaviour to support both staff and patients. These improvements, if implemented, will help ensure that all mothers receive safe, high-quality care during pregnancy and birth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, let me congratulate the honourable member for Chichester for securing today's debate. My constituents are watching at home, and you very eloquently set the set of challenges that face our maternity services and the health of women and friends across the UK, so thank you for doing that so well. When people in Redditch elect their members of parliament, Mr. Chope, they do so with a clear mandate on maternity services and the future of the Alexandra Hospital. And it would be remiss of me not to thank the shadow spokesperson today who did a tour of service at our hospital in the earlier parts of his career, and we thank him for that. Our maternity services are famed for delivering one Harry Styles many years ago, but since 2015...
Just the one.
One Harry Styles. But more seriously, in 2015, Mr. Chope, our maternity services were temporarily closed and relocated to Worcestershire Royal. That temporary relocation was made permanent in 2017. That is the only site delivering such services across our entire county. That means that many of my residents are forced to travel both to Worcester or Birmingham to get the services that they need. And whilst the honourable member moving the motion was brave enough to share some of the stories that she has heard from her constituents, I'm quite frankly not strong enough to retell some of the stories I have heard of stillbirths and parents frighteningly giving birth to their children on the roadside to retell them in the way that they deserved. Now, since 2015, Mr. Chope, the initial promises to return those services to my constituency have been forgotten. Despite signatories totalling over 50,000 from the local community, no parameters on the return of such services have been discussed by the ICB. I want safe services for my constituents, but whilst the current configuration of services concerns me, the future of my services in my constituency deeply concerns me. Worcestershire Royal has significant constraints on growth. Worcestershire is set to deliver tens of thousands of new homes and huge population growth in the next 10 years, with pressures on those services set to rise substantially. As this government seeks to rebuild and reconfigure our NHS, it's time for those services to meet the needs of those in the present and, most importantly, deliver the services of the future. I urge the government to review decisions taken on centralisation of services that may have made sense in the past but won't be in the future.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to intervene. On the subject of centralisation, I'm proud to represent Inverness, Skye and West Rothshire, and also my colleague who cannot be here does Caithness and Sutherland. Our nearest maternity hospital is Inverness, and that is 4 hours each way from parts of Sutherland, parts of Argyll, the island of Egg, Rum, Muck, which I'm sure you're familiar with, or should be. I wonder if you could support our case that centralisation is becoming a real problem for expectant mothers who are suffering enormous complications because of the distance, because the smaller regional hospitals are no longer providing maternity care. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chope. Thank you for that intervention. I'm sorry to hear about the the level of problems that you're facing and mothers are facing in your constituency. The honourable member started this debate talking about this is about services for women at their most vulnerable when they're giving birth. And I think it's clear from the experiences of your constituents and mine that currently services aren't meeting the needs of those women when they need it the most. And that's the challenge that we should be looking forward to take up now. And so, Mr. Chope, I'll just finish by saying, in the past, reconfiguration of services have been based on a financial envelope and the challenges of staff shortages. And that's dictated many decisions of the past. But now is the time, with the contents of the Darcy report and the eloquent speeches by those today, to build that service for the future. And if that means making difficult financial decisions to invest in the long term, we should all be reaching to meet that challenge so that we can give women and families the support that they deserve.
There are 3 speakers and we've got 5 minutes to go. Marie Goldman.
Thank you, Sir Christopher, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Chichester, for this really important debate. I will keep this brief. I won't reiterate all the things that have been said before, although there are a couple of things that I did want to say about how important it is to be talking about women and the absolute most vulnerable point in their lives, and also the most vulnerable point for babies who are being born. I don't think there cannot be a more important time in their lives than the moment when they are being born. So that is why it is so important. And I speak as a woman, as a mother, but as a human being. And we're discussing the rebirth of the human race. I don't think there's anything more profound than that. But I actually wanted to focus on something that hasn't been raised very much here, and that's the role of the CQC in keeping our maternity services safe. One of the hospitals that serves my constituency of Chelmsford is Broomfield Hospital. And it was recently rated, at the beginning of January, it was downgraded, and it was rated as inadequate for its maternity services. Now, that is shocking enough and worrying enough. And I have met with Broomfield Hospital, and I've been into the maternity services there and talked about how, and I want to help and support them to improve. But what really concerns me about the CQC is that they carried out their inspection in March last year and only released their report in January. I think that is utterly unacceptable. How can we be expected to be able to hold our services to account? How can we help them to improve if we don't even know what's wrong with them in the first place? And it's the CQC's job to tell us what's wrong with those services and lay it out bare so that we can learn from the things that are going wrong and very quickly put them right. It is not okay for the CQC to turn around and say, oh, we've had technical difficulties with our new system and therefore we couldn't get the report out there. That is not good enough. It's not good enough to say, well, we shared some of our findings with the hospital without also making those public at the same time. It is simply not good enough. We need to be supporting the CQC to do much, much better. And I'm very conscious of time. I know there are other members that wanted to speak, but I would just like to underline the importance of the role of the CQC in this and all leadership across the whole of across all of the NHS, from the excellent job that the midwives and the support staff do in the maternity centres, right the way through to the leadership of the hospitals, the chief executive, and the ICBs. They all have a role to play in improving maternity services, and the CQC has a huge role to play, and they must do better. Thank you.
Max Wilkinson.
Thanks, Sir Christopher. Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I will go for about a minute. The Minister heard from me last autumn when we had a debate about Gloucestershire's maternity services. The background remains as it was before, but there is an important update. When I was elected, Cheltenham General Hospital's birth unit had been closed temporarily, and I think we should now use the words indefinitely, since autumn of 2022. That simply isn't good enough. Cheltenham has a population of about 120,000. It serves a much, much larger area. Since then, Gloucestershire Royal's maternity services have been downgraded to inadequate. They remain inadequate and have done, I think, for a number of years. Now, there have been some really, really worrying bits of casework slipping into my inbox recently, which tells me that on the subject of bad bleeds, which has been raised by the CQC, things are going wrong and there are ongoing issues. The member for Chelmsford particularly referenced the point about the CQC's lag time. We had a report which was made by the CQC after a visit last spring. It's been made in January. So there is clearly a long delay there. I will end there, Sir Christopher, to give my colleague from Winchester a minute, but I would hope the Minister might be able to respond on those points and update me on what's going on with Gloucestershire Hospitals, NHS.
Dr. Danny Chambers.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. It's a pleasure to serve, and I appreciate my honourable friend, for bringing this debate forward from Chichester. You spoke very movingly and very eloquently and reminded everyone that these are not just statistics, but they're actually our people as well. 3 points very briefly, Sir Christopher. My honourable friend from Eastleigh touched on maternal mental health. You know, as a mental health spokesperson for the Lib Dems, we're absolutely shocked, as everyone else would be, to know that the number one cause of death of women 12 months post-giving birth is taking their own life. This is absolutely tragic. And it's one reason that my team here are organising an event in Parliament this April, bringing together women who've experienced mental health challenges during pregnancy and after childbirth, with the group Delivering Better. This event will provide a platform to share stories, raise awareness, and discuss how we can improve support and services for mothers across the country. Recently, I was at the 120th anniversary of Liverpool Vet School, where I went to university, and I was speaking to the Pro-Vice Chancellor, Professor Louise Kenny, who is an obs and gynae obstetrician consultant, and she's also a specialist, or she does a lot of research in health during gestation and the months after birth. And we're discussing the latest research, which we haven't touched on today, but I'll briefly touch on this now. You know, healthy gestation is the foundation of a person's lifelong health, and it has a far greater impact than any lifestyle changes made in adulthood. And I think we need to look at not just birth itself, but the actual care of the mother before birth, everything from stress to nutrition. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. And can I start by thanking my friend, the Honourable Member for Chichester, for bringing this important debate today and for making such an excellent opening speech, which I think covered off most of the ground that we need to cover. But it is important to acknowledge that the vast majority of babies arrive safely here, even when there are an increasing number of complex pregnancies to deal with. And while my own experience of having a baby is 16 years ago now, I'm sure that the thousands of women that are having babies now have the same experience that I did, that the staff in those maternity units and hospitals make you feel simultaneously as if you are the most important person ever to have given a baby, and also that you're the umpteenth person this week. They know exactly what they're doing and you can relax. And in my case, even when everything went wrong, I felt like that. Great testament to the professionalism of the staff at Wickham General Hospital all those years ago. Now, this is one of the many debates I've attended on maternity services in the last 3 years. And the first followed the issuing of Donna Ockenden's report into maternity services in Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust, which serves my constituents, including Kayleigh and Colin Griffiths, who fought alongside Rhiannon Davis and Richard Stanton, and others, to give a voice to the many families who suffered as a result of the failings at Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust. But it wasn't the first scandal in NHS maternity services. Morecambe Bay had already been investigated and reported on by Dr Bill Kirkup. And tragically, it wasn't the last either. Dr Kirkup has reviewed significant failings at East Kent, and Donna Ockenden is currently investigating a huge number of incidents at Nottingham. And we've heard today also the concerns of members for East Worthing and Leeds about the state of services at Leeds and Sussex. And we are, I'm sure, across the House very concerned that the tragedy that happened at Shrewsbury and Telford will not be the last. And it makes me quite angry to say that this is not a surprise when we've heard that 65% of trusts have been rated as inadequate or requiring improvement when it comes to safety in maternity services in the CQC's latest survey. Now, that's despite the commitments from the dispatch box, which I believe were made in good faith by the last government, to deal with unsafe staffing levels and cultural change across the country. And the lack of action is frankly unacceptable. Now, Donna Ockenden described the former Conservative government as being asleep at the wheel when it came to making progress on the 15 immediate and essential actions she recommended for the whole of England in March 2022. And that's despite the government accepting all of those immediate and acceptable essential actions. And each of the reviews into these heartbreaking tragedies has found the same recurring themes. Poor management of incidents when things go wrong, and most critically, a failure to learn from them. That's indicative of defensive management culture and sometimes toxic working arrangements, including an inability for staff to feel that they have the freedom to speak out and inadequate protection for whistleblowers when they do. a failure to ensure safe and timely assessment at triage, a reluctance to acknowledge the need for medicalisation for a C-section when one is in the best interests of the mother, unsuitable estates and a lack of access to equipment, as we've heard from the Honourable Member for Epsom and Ewell this morning, and unsafe staffing levels really underpinning all of these issues. And this is a really important point because staff are experiencing burnout, they're leaving the service in high numbers, and they have the inability to deliver the care that they really want to deliver to mothers at their most vulnerable moment. So there's no excuses now. The issues have been identified time and time again. But instead, there is evidence that we're going backwards on maternity care. The 2015 National Maternity Safety Ambition to halve rates of stillbirths, neonatal and maternal deaths by 2025 has stalled, and it's unlikely to be met this year. And there's a shocking disparity of outcomes between different ethnic groups. Black women are more than twice as likely to die than white ones, and other ethnic groups also carry an unacceptably high risk. No one really understands why there's been no research into this. There are clear links to deprivation, because people in deprived areas also carry a much higher risk. But translation difficulties, certain health conditions, and shamefully even racism may all play a part in this shocking disparity. The Women's Health Strategy for England proposed to address these disparities, but it's impossible to point to any measurable progress. Now, poor maternity care can have a devastating impact on families, and it makes no sense for the taxpayer either. As we've heard, 60% of the value of clinical negligence claims are related to maternity services, costing more than £1 billion a year. It makes no sense not to address these issues. So in conclusion, Sir Christopher, it's important to acknowledge the work of charities such as SANS and Tommy's, and the work of a number of APPGs in this place over the last few years, including the Baby Loss APPG, the Maternity APPG and the Birth Trauma APPG, all of which I was involved in. They have campaigned tirelessly for safe staffing levels and to improve care across England and indeed the UK. This debate relates to England because health is a devolved matter, but the whole of the UK must strive to become the safest place in the world to have a baby. Addressing disparities in obstetric care is essential for a fair society. The immediate and essential actions of the Ockenden report must be implemented at once, because if they're not, more families will face the trauma of a birth injury or worse. Now, they included a commitment to safe staffing. In 2022, the government made a significant investment in staffing. It's essential that that is continued. The commitments made in the workforce plan must be backed by adequate funding and include expansion of the wider maternity and neonatal workforce. The UK government must renew the national maternity ambitions beyond 2025 to include all 4 nations and with a clear baseline to measure progress. It must also address this critical issue of health disparities. Donna Ockenden said in her 2022 report into Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust, the impact of death or serious health complications suffered as a result of maternity care cannot be underestimated. The impact on the lives of families and loved ones is profound and permanent. Now, in my first debate in March 2022, the day that report was issued, everyone in the chamber contributing said that the scandal at Shrewsbury and Telford should be the last. It was not. I hope the Minister will commit to a strategy today to ensure that maternity care scandals are ended on the watch of this government. Thank you.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Sir Christopher. And I'm pleased by the Lib Dem spokesman to point out that actually so many people do have a good birth. I think that's really important. There's a danger to scare potential mothers, but actually there is good quality care up and down the country, but it can be better. The member for Redditch pointed to my work. I never actually served in Redditch in the obs and gynae and the peds there. My time was done in the early 2010s over at Worcester. And actually one of my favourite times as being a doctor was being on the elective C-section list, seeing the mothers go in, having the music there and seeing birth after birth and such a great tribute. It was fantastic. Also, as my experience was one of the worst things I've ever had to do, being handed a baby lifeless as a paediatrician, trying to sort that out. And worse still, an emergency C-section after a mother had the baby go into the bladder, both going off to the intensive care units, and I had to go and speak to the father who was expecting a normal delivery to tell him what was going on. This is the reality of what does happen, because giving a baby, having a baby, does carry inherent risks. But what we're talking about here is what we can do to mitigate them. And I think that's the heart of what the member for Chichester has so eloquently put out. This is about the safety of what we can mitigate. And her story about Bendy and Steph will stick with many people because that's exactly what this House and the NHS should be trying to avoid. We can mitigate as much risk as we can, and that should be the aim. We've also heard talk about breastfeeding. Postpartum mental health is really important, and those things should form part of a strategy. And going on to that, not all patients receive the safe and timely assessment when they're being triaged, with instances of phone triage going unanswered, and some women discharging themselves before even being seen or picked up due to the delays. This was backed up by the Care Quality Commission, who found that unsafe practices in triage form the basis for 81% of the enforcement actions issued to providers, and was found to be a safety concern in about a third of all inspections. A member for Epsom and Ewell pointed about the fantastic quality of care that she has despite the conditions, and we know that 18% of the NHS estates have been described as not fit for purpose, lacking the space for facilities. Now, if I look at my constituents, we have a plan to bring forward improved maternity centre for Leicestershire. That has been delayed in the Futures programme for hospitals too, but at least there is funding coming forward to try and deal with that. Looking at the record of the previous government from 2010 to 2022, the rates of stillbirth reduced by 19.3%. The rate of neonatal mortality for babies born over 24 weeks gestational age of viability reduced by 36%, and maternal mortality reduced by 17%. In 2015, the government launched the National Maternity Safety Ambition, which was to halve the 2010 rates of stillbirth, neonatal and maternal deaths and brain injuries in babies occurring during, soon or after birth by 2025. The current government has not yet set out an updated ambition for the next decade, so I'd appreciate if the Minister would set that forward. As of December 2023, there were 2,361 full-time equivalent midwives working in the NHS Trust and other core organisations. This was an increase of 3,707, 18.9% since 2010. But on the other hand, the birth rate is falling and the number of midwives is rising. I recognise that births are taking place are more complex than they somewhat used to be due to things like diabetes, weight and also age. So it's really important that we have a plan to deal with that, and I hope the Minister will comment going forward. That leads me on to community midwives and the continuity of care. We know that this is inextricably linked to improved care. A report by Cochrane, a non-profit organisation that produces global research to improve health outcomes, showed that women who experience continuity of care, in other words, seeing the same midwife or teams of midwives in pregnancy, have far better outcomes. During the last Parliament, funding was provided for the implementation of continuity of care models. As of April 2024, an additional 186 million had been allocated to improve the quality of care for mothers and babies and increase the number of midwives in post available. And I further welcome the previous government provided 6.8 million in funding to help implement the continuity of care for black and ethnic minority groups living in the most deprived areas. As we've heard in this debate, this is a real concern, particularly pointed out by the member opposite with her professional experience, about the disparities we see in seeking behaviours and those from BMA backgrounds when it comes to having babies. We also saw this from my work in the Health Select Committee, and I'd asked the Minister to have a look at the two reports that looked at litigation and the Ockenden report in the last Parliament. There is a lot of good work, cross-party work, that could help inform current thinking going forward. Of course, far more remains to be done in the area of saving babies. NHS England has published its own delivery plan for maternal and neonatal services in March 2023. Commitments included updating the Saving Babies Lives Care bundle by 2024 and introducing a national maternity early warning score and updated newborn early warning triggers and a tracker for following up those babies in those cases. The Saving Babies Lives Care bundle is helping to provide the best practice for providers to reduce neonatal mortality and is rightly a major component of the NHS England's maternal and neonatal services delivery plan. Could the Minister provide an update on the implementation of version 3 of the care bundle? Now, going forward, there are a few closing questions that I'd like to pose. The maternal mortality gap has reduced over a few years from 5 times to 2 times, but clearly we need to do more. What further action will the government take to address the issue of Black and Asian maternal mortality gap? And what is the ambition to be set out? At the general election, the government stood on a manifesto to recruit more midwives. Could the government confirm how this fits into the long-term workforce plan, which I'm pleased to see they have stuck with from the previous government and look to amend? In the new operational planning guidance, the NHS England has committed to implementing the key actions in the 3-year delivery plan. Could the Minister provide an update on progress against some of these actions, namely a commitment to introduce a national maternity early warning score system and an updated newborn early warning trigger and track tool? And as part of its response to the East Kent review, the last government established a group overseeing maternity safety services nationwide, chaired by the former colleague Maria Caulfield. Can the Minister provide an update on the National Oversight Group's work and whether she or any of her ministerial colleagues are part of those discussions? Further still, the final question is to look at the litigation. We heard it raised by the honourable member from Godlingham and Ash, and there is a report under his chairmanship that looks at different models, the likes of Japan when it comes to maternity, how we can reduce the cost for taxpayers but improve that honest discussion that we need from clinicians to be able to feel they can come forward and whistle-blow. And after all, in conclusion, Sir Christopher, birth is not about making babies, it's about making mothers strong, competent and capable. And we do this by supporting, respecting and informing mothers every step of the way. I think that's an admirable aim for this House and the NHS, and I look forward to the Minister's comments.
Thank you, Sir Christopher, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I am grateful to Honourable Member for Chichester for raising this extremely important issue today, and one that does touch so many families across our country and so many of our constituents. And I know how many people that she has spoken to and many other honourable members. As the Secretary of State said, it is an issue that does keep him awake at night, and I think she spoke very movingly about her own friend Steph and the son Bendy, who I know she remembers very fondly, and too many decades of similar stories. I think she did good service to her friend and Bendy today. I will do my best to answer as many questions as possible. It's been a very wide-ranging, very respectful and very thoughtful debate. And where I don't, I know my colleague, the Minister for Patient Safety, Baroness Merrin, who leads on this for the department, will be happy to write to any colleagues where necessary. The Honourable Lady for Chichester asked a number of questions at the end of her talk. I hope I will address most of them. I completely understand why she's pushing on behalf of the families the Secretary of State met to outline that maternity services plan. Families have waited long enough, but we do want to make sure we get this right. So we are taking time within the department to discuss the next steps with officials and ensure that any plans we do put out are as strong as and effective as possible. I think we've had too many plans that haven't done that. So those families will receive an update on next steps very soon. In terms of the essential actions from previous reports, I will come on to some of those, but to re-emphasise, all Don Ockendon's recommendations were accepted and are being worked on, and we'll pick that up later in this speech. In terms of workforce and training, we will publish the refreshed long-term workforce plan in the summer, setting out how we will build a transformed health service over the next decade, which obviously will include midwifery. With regard to the CQC, I can say I won't be able to get through if I take them.
There's a sixth form called La Retraite in London, and they have a T-level qualification with health with midwifery, and they're linked up with St Guy's and St Thomas's. It's proving absolutely successful, and I wondered if the Minister would consider working with the Secretary of State for Education to actually look at rolling this out perhaps throughout the country, because it's proving really successful in getting new midwives into the system.
She raises a point very close to my heart. I've spoken frequently in opposition about apprenticeships and the need for the health service work together. I've actually visited that centre and met with the students there. It was a lovely visit. I did with the Chief Nursing Officer. We had a fantastic morning with really enthusiastic
young people wanting to go into the profession. I think she makes an excellent point, and we will continue to work with Guy's and St Thomas's on that, and others could take note of what they are doing. With regard to the CQC, we understand the issues with the CQC. Those are well documented, further highlighted by the member for Cheltenham and Chelmsford. We don't think now is the time to make changes to the statutory limitation power, because we want the CQC to prioritise improving their regulatory approach and focusing resources on the recovery plan in line with the Dash report. But once this is done and the CQC is working better, this government has committed to reviewing that statute of limitation power. With regard to phone lines, Sans and Tommy's do a fantastic work for bereaved parents across the country, and I know that from my own constituency in Bristol South. We are always open to new ideas about suggestions and experience of working with people on the ground, and I will ask officials to consider recording triage phone lines as part of our longer-term work on maternity and neonatal services. And on communications, generally a point raised by many honourable members, she's absolutely right to raise communications for parents, both mothers and fathers, a point well made today, and I will pick up on that later. Sir Christopher, Donna Ockenden rightly commands huge respect across government, across parties and across the NHS, and she was right to say that previous governments were asleep at the wheel when it came to maternity care. We've heard today those figures again, but worth restating that babies of black ethnicity are twice as likely to be stillborn than babies of white ethnicity. The maternity workforce is experiencing significant challenges, and safety in maternity care is very far from where we want it to be. I know that honourable members highlighted the work that they do in meeting families. The Secretary of State has met with a number of bereaved families over the past few months, and with Baroness Merron, and I know that others have done. My friend from East Worthing and Shoreham talked about the families that he met, and he highlighted that when he came to talk to me about issues in his constituency recently. But as with so many other issues in healthcare, there is no quick fix to the challenges we face. There have been too many high-profile independent reviews into maternity services over the past few years. With remarkable consistency, they all point to the same thing: a culture that belittles women, downplays concerns, and puts reputations above all else, even patient safety. And we know that's wrong. We know what needs to happen. It is now time to crack on and deliver. We are making steady progress on recommendations from all 15 areas of the Shrewsbury and Telford review, such as workforce accountability and bereavement care. Much of this progress has been made through NHS England's 3-year delivery plan. The plan seeks to make maternity and neonatal care safer, fairer and more tailored to every woman's needs by setting out expectations for informed choice and personalised care planning to improve women's experience in labour and birth. The initiatives, some of which have been highlighted today, the Saving Babies Life Care Bundle, helping to reduce stillbirths and preterm births, has been rolled out to every trust in England. The Perinatal Culture and Leadership Programme, an initiative to promote and sustain a culture of safety that I'm pleased all 150 maternity and neonatal units in England have signed up to. Initiatives to reduce inequalities, because as I know from my own constituency, women living in deprived areas are more likely to suffer adverse outcomes. And it's right that local systems are trying to bridge the gap through equity and equality action plans. We have set clear expectations for escalation and accountability through the 3-year plan, and we're supporting staff to hold their hands up when things go wrong through freedom to speak up. The public can monitor the progress of the 3-year plan against the Ockenden recommendations through their local maternity and neonatal systems and integrated care boards. Local women and families, should they choose, see what progress has been made, who is accountable and how the system is changing. NHS England are also investing £10 million every year to target the 10 most deprived areas of England. Sir Christopher, safety must be the watchword at every step of the journey. NHS Resolution's maternity incentive scheme is rewarding NHS trusts that prove they are taking concrete steps to improve the quality of care for women, families and newborn. Now, as highlighted by the honourable gentleman opposite, since 2010, neonatal maternity rate has shown steady signs of improvement, decreasing by a quarter for babies born after at least 24 weeks of pregnancy. The stillbirth rate in England has decreased by 22%, and the overall rate of brain injuries occurring during or soon after birth has fallen by 3%. But we all know there is so much more to be done to improve outcomes for mothers and babies and to ensure they receive the safe care they need. There are ongoing initiatives to ensure lessons are learnt from every tragic event and prevent similar events happening in the future. Hospitals carry out internal perinatal mortality reviews that aim to provide answers for bereaved parents about why their baby died and give them some closure. They also help hospitals to improve care and ensure we learn the lessons from every tragedy. The Maternity and Newborn Safety Investigations Programme conducts independent investigations of early neonatal deaths, intrapartum stillbirths and severe brain injury in babies after labour. And all NHS trusts are required to report these incidents, carry out an independent investigation and make safety recommendations to improve services in the future. And for those parents who do go through the heartbreak of losing a baby, we must do everything we can to support them in their grief. That's why this government extended the baby loss certificates, and as of last week we've issued almost 100,000 to grieving parents. That's why through the 3-year plan we've made provision for 7-day bereavement care supported by investment. And that's why we will continue to support the work of Sands and Tommies who do so much for bereaved mums and dads across the UK. The Honourable Lady bringing the debate rightly talks about the importance of workforce and meeting safe levels of staffing. Throughout this winter, I've seen up close NHS staff doing their absolute best in appalling circumstances that were not of their own making. And I know that however dedicated our NHS staff may be, they cannot provide the right care without the right support. And that's why we are committed to tackling the retention and recruitment challenges in the NHS. That's why work is underway to modernise NHS working cultures and make our hospitals more attractive for top talent. This includes a much stronger focus on health and well-being, more support for flexible working and a renewed commitment to tackling inequality and discrimination. Bringing the staff we need will take time, but it is an absolute priority for this government and for me personally. NHS England is leading a range of initiatives to boost retention of existing staff and ensure the NHS remains an attractive career choice for new recruits. And of course, to the Honourable Member for Strangford, we are keen to work with all devolved governments to ensure this and share learning. There is a dedicated midwifery retention programme. The Honourable Member for Chichester highlighted this issue, as did the Honourable Member for Calder Valley, about retaining staff. The initiative contains a range of measures, including the creation of a midwifery and nursing retention self-assessment tool, mentoring schemes, strengthened advice and support on pensions, embedding flexible retirement options. NHS England also invested in retention leads for every maternity ward, which alongside investment in workforce and capacity has shown promising signs of bringing down vacancy, leaver and turnover rates. And leaver rate decline went from 10.3% in September 2023 to 9% in September last year. So progress, but we know there is more to be done. As of November, there were a record number of midwives working in NHS Trust, around 24,700 working full-time, which is up from over 1,300 compared to the year before. Finally, Sir Christopher, while all this work is going on, we are also doing the hard yards of fixing the foundations of NHS and making it fit for the future. I am pleased that the National Institute for Health and Care Research have commissioned over 40 studies looking at how we can prevent preterm births and improve care for babies and women. They've launched a £50 million funding call, challenging researchers and policymakers to come up with new ways of tackling maternity inequalities and poor pregnancy outcomes. And while this work is going on, we will be continuing to talk to staff through the 10-year plan. The Right Honourable, my friend, the Secretary of State, is attending a staff event in Peterborough on Thursday, and I will be doing one next week. We want to know how we can better support our own staff and make sure that we unleash their potential and give patients the care they need. A central part of the 10-year plan will be our workforce and how we train, provide the staff, technology and infrastructure the NHS needs to care for patients across our communities. Now, my Honourable Member for Epsom and Ewell is right to highlight the estate, which is also a problem in this area. We need to be considering all policies, including those that impact midwife and maternity and neonatal care. Over 95,000 people have responded so far to consultation, and we want to hear more of that. We've heard today about the midwifery-led care from my friend from Lichfield. We've heard about mental health support from a member from Eastleigh and Winchester, and a member for Dewsbury and Batley, all talking about that. I hope that they contribute to that consultation. We just conscious that I need to give the Honourable Member a few moments to finish up. We know that we will not be able to fix these issues overnight. We are committed to investing in safety, workforce retention and tackling inequalities and making steady progress. We, as also highlighted, most women do have safe care with a healthy baby and are made to feel special at a very special moment. That is a testament to the staff. We need to make sure that happens for all women everywhere. A lot of work has been done, Sir Christopher. There is a lot left to be done, but I'm confident we will build a maternity and neonatal system that delivers for every woman.
Just round for
Thank you, Sir Christopher.
Christopher. I'd like to thank all of the members across the House for their constructive tone to this morning's debate. It is clearly an area that there is passion on all sides of the House, and I thank the Minister for her replies to the questions, and I'm sure a lot of members will be writing follow-up letters to Baroness Merrin asking for further detail on particular areas. I will forgive her for her pun, crack on and deliver when talking about maternity services. And she did mention that there are lessons learned from every tragic event, and the only thing that I would like to finish by saying is that the parents that I spoke to did not feel like lessons were being learned from their tragic events, because nobody was asking them what had happened. So if one thing can come out of this today, it's a message to all NHS trusts and ICBs that when there are tragic events, please don't cover them up. Please contact those parents, because they want to talk to you and they want to make it better for those parents in the future and the babies that we lost too soon. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered maternity services. As many opinions say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.